It was a quiet morning at Kensington Palace, the kind of morning that should have been ordinary. Birds chirped outside the windows, the sun spilled golden light across the manicured gardens, and life went on in the stately rooms that had seen generations of royalty live and love. Yet inside one of those rooms, everything had changed. Kate Middleton, the Duchess of Cambridge, stood frozen, staring at a message that would upend her world. A message that no one should ever receive. Prince William, her husband, the man she had shared her life with through triumphs, joys, and private fears, had been given a diagnosis so devastating that it felt almost surreal. The kind of news that makes time stop. The kind of news that forces you to face the unthinkable. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What exactly did this diagnosis mean? And how would Kate, a woman known for her poise and composure, navigate a storm that threatened to engulf everything she held dear? In the first moments after learning the news, Kate's mind raced. Every memory, every conversation, every laugh they had shared together seemed to flash before her eyes in a dizzying montage of love and intimacy. She felt the sharp sting of fear, the tremor of helplessness, and the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. But the world outside Kensington Palace had no idea. No one could know how close they were to a personal tragedy that could forever alter the monarchy's most beloved couple. The morning began with routine. Breakfast in the sunlit dining room, a glance at the garden where their children often played, and the quiet exchange of words that had become comforting rituals. Then came the call. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but the words it carried shattered the fragile bubble of normalcy. A medical condition so serious, so unpredictable, that it would demand courage and resilience beyond anything Kate had ever imagined. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling as if the room itself were spinning. The news was not something she could simply digest and move on. It was a tidal wave threatening to drown the life she had carefully built alongside William. Kate's first instinct was denial. Surely there must be a mistake. Surely the doctors were wrong, or the results misinterpreted. But as the minutes ticked by, the reality settled like a shadow over her heart. She realized she could not escape this moment. And yet, she had to stay strong, not just for herself, but for William, for their children, and for the countless eyes watching their lives, whether they knew it or not. Imagine, just for a moment, the pressure of maintaining composure when the ground beneath you has crumbled. Could you manage it? Could anyone? What makes this story even more compelling is the secrecy that surrounds it. While the world perceives Kate and William as a flawless couple, untouched by the struggles that ordinary people face, the truth is far more human and far more devastating. Behind the gilded walls of their home, Kate wrestled with the unbearable. The prospect of losing her partner, the father of her children, the man she had promised to stand beside in sickness and in health. And yet, there was no room for despair. In the palace, appearances matter. Public image matters. The monarchy depends on it. And so Kate made a choice, one that would test her limits, her patience, and her courage. But the question lingers. What would a person do when faced with such a crisis? How do you say goodbye to someone who is still here, whose life is hanging by a fragile thread? Kate's dilemma is not just medical. It is profoundly emotional, philosophical, and deeply human. She had to navigate not only her own grief, but also the expectations of a public that demands perfection, the scrutiny of the press, and the complex dynamics of a royal family with its own unspoken rules and hidden tensions. Could love alone be enough to carry her through this storm? Could loyalty, courage, and devotion be enough to face what was coming? Early in this ordeal, Kate sought solace in the small rituals that had always grounded her. A morning walk in the gardens, a quiet conversation with her children, moments of prayer and reflection. Each gesture, each breath, became an anchor in a reality that seemed increasingly unsteady. Yet, no amount of preparation could have readied her for what came next. Behind closed doors, there were whispers. Concerns from aides, murmurs from friends who feared for William's health, and the constant presence of an unforgiving media that had no idea how close they were to a personal catastrophe. And it wasn't just Kate who was grappling with the shock. William, usually composed and stoic, felt the crushing weight of uncertainty himself. How do you remain a leader, a father, a husband, when your own body has betrayed you in ways you cannot control? The couple's bond, tested by years of public scrutiny, now faced an even more intimate test: survival, hope, and the terrifying prospect of loss. Every decision became magnified, every action scrutinized, even if only by the silent eyes of family and staff. How Kate would respond in these moments would define not only her role as a duchess, but as a partner in the most profound sense of the word. Yet, the world outside continued, oblivious to the private storm raging inside Kensington Palace. Journalists speculated about trivial matters, royal watchers debated appearances, and social media churned with opinions. The contrast could not have been starker, a life-altering crisis hidden behind a veneer of normalcy. Kate's challenge was not only to protect William, but to shield the world from the raw truth until she had navigated the first waves of shock, fear, and decision-making. It is in these moments of unseen struggle that true courage is revealed. And Kate had no choice but to summon every ounce of it. Even as she contemplated the enormity of what lay ahead, Kate's mind returned repeatedly to her children. How do you explain such a situation to them? How do you maintain their sense of security when your own world has been upended? These are questions no one can answer easily. And yet, Kate faced them with a quiet determination, even as her heart ached with uncertainty. The juxtaposition of private fear and public duty is a tension that few can imagine, and it is here that this story truly begins. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of this crisis was not the diagnosis itself, but the unknown trajectory it would set. What came next for William and Kate was a path uncharted, a series of choices with consequences that could reverberate across the monarchy, their family, and their lives forever. And the first of those choices was one Kate would have to make alone, in the silence of a palace room that had never felt so empty, so full of expectation, so laden with possibility and dread at the same time. The question now hangs in the air, both for Kate and for all of us watching from afar. What would she do? How does one hold on when the possibility of loss looms so near? And what secret steps might Kate take to protect not only the man she loves, but the family and legacy they have built together? The answers, hidden behind closed doors, would shock the palace, the public, and anyone who thought they knew the true story of William and Kate. It started like any other morning at Kensington Palace. The sun spilled across the manicured gardens, birds sang from the tall oaks, and the air carried that crisp freshness that hinted at the promise of a new day. Inside the walls of the palace, routines unfolded quietly, staff moving through corridors with practiced precision, breakfast prepared in gleaming kitchens, and children's laughter echoing softly from rooms above. To the outside world, life seemed calm, even serene. But for Kate Middleton, the Duchess of Cambridge, this morning would mark a pivot point, a moment that would redefine everything she thought she knew about the life she had built alongside Prince William. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. A phone call, brief and professional, interrupted the gentle cadence of her day. Kate had learned to expect that calls at this hour were routine, logistics, charity work updates, or messages from royal staff. But there was a tone in the voice on the other end, a controlled urgency, that immediately set her nerves on edge. Words were spoken, seemingly clinical, but the weight behind them was undeniable. Prince William's diagnosis. The word itself was heavy, impossible to ignore. Kate felt her chest tighten, a cold wave rolling over her, and she instinctively clutched the edge of the polished dining table to steady herself. Imagine for a moment being in her shoes. You wake up to a seemingly ordinary day, surrounded by everything familiar, only to have the world shift in an instant. How would you process such news? How could you absorb it without collapsing, without letting despair dictate your actions? Kate's first response was denial. Surely this was a mistake, a miscommunication. There had to be some error in the test, in the reading, in the way the news was delivered. She wanted to dismiss it, to shove it away like a shadow that didn't belong in the light of morning. But reality, cruel and unyielding, does not bend to wishful thinking. As she sat there, absorbing each word, the reality of William's situation began to crystallize. The diagnosis was serious, complex, and unpredictable. It wasn't the kind of illness that could be simply treated and forgotten. It demanded attention, action, and resilience. And for Kate, it demanded courage, an enormous, almost unimaginable courage. She thought of William as more than just a husband. He was the father of her children, her partner in navigating the pressures of public life, the man who had shared countless private moments of laughter, intimacy, and support. Now, he was vulnerable in a way she had never witnessed, exposed to a battle that was both deeply personal and inevitably public. The challenge was not only in understanding the medical details, but in grappling with the emotional impact, the fear, the uncertainty, and the sheer weight of what lay ahead. Kate's mind raced through the implications. How would this affect their family life? Their children? Their public duties? Every decision she had made until this point suddenly seemed minor in comparison to the monumental task of supporting William through the unknown. She knew that panic would serve no purpose. Yet how could she quiet the storm of anxiety building within her? How could she maintain her composure when everything inside her was screaming in fear? As the hours passed, Kate began to take stock. She reached for the routines that had always grounded her. A quiet cup of tea, a walk through the gardens, moments of reflection that offered temporary calm. But the shadow of the diagnosis loomed over everything. Each step she took was measured, each breath deliberate, as though moving too quickly would shatter the fragile control she was trying to maintain. In these moments, she realized that her role was no longer just that of a supportive spouse. It was now a role that demanded strategic thinking, emotional fortitude, and the ability to navigate a world that would inevitably watch her every move. Meanwhile, William himself was facing his own storm of emotions. Known for his composure and steady demeanor, he was suddenly forced to confront a vulnerability he had rarely experienced publicly. Behind the calm exterior, there was fear. There was doubt. There was a sense of helplessness that came with realizing that one's own body could betray you in ways that could not be controlled. The couple's bond, forged over years of shared experiences and challenges, would now be tested in the most intimate, harrowing way imaginable. Kate's instinct was to protect William, to shield him from unnecessary worry, and to take on the burden of decision-making herself. But she knew that secrecy could only stretch so far. The monarchy is a world under constant scrutiny, where even the smallest signs of distress can become headlines and speculation. Balancing the need for privacy with the demands of public perception would be a challenge unlike any she had faced before. She understood, in those quiet early hours, that every choice she made would ripple outward, touching not just her family, but the institution they represented. Yet even in this moment of profound fear, Kate demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for resilience. She began to plan, not with panic, but with determination. Each conversation with aides, each consultation with medical professionals, became a step toward regaining some sense of control. She reminded herself that while the diagnosis was daunting, it was not the end. There were possibilities, treatments, and paths forward. But above all, she reminded herself that she was not alone. William, despite his own vulnerability, was there beside her, and together they could face what no one else could fully understand. As the day wore on, Kate moved through the palace like a figure caught between two worlds. To the outside observer, she maintained her composed, graceful demeanor, appearing as the poised duchess known and admired by millions. Inside, however, her thoughts were a whirlwind of fear, hope, and strategy. She thought of their children, of the legacy they were building, and of the vow she had made to stand by William through every trial. Could love truly provide the strength to face the unknown? Could devotion and loyalty carry someone through a storm of such magnitude? Kate's answer, in that moment, was a determined yes, but the journey ahead would test her in ways she could not yet foresee. And then came the first major decision: how to move forward without letting the outside world see the fragility of the situation. Kate knew that every public appearance, every engagement, every smile would be scrutinized. She had to balance truth with discretion, openness with protection. It was a delicate dance, one that demanded emotional intelligence, courage, and foresight. And even as she considered these practicalities, her heart ached for the moments she could no longer take for granted. quiet breakfasts with William, walks through the palace gardens, the laughter of children that filled their home with warmth. The morning gave way to afternoon, and still the reality of the diagnosis settled over the couple like a heavy fog. Kate met with doctors and advisors, quietly asking questions, seeking clarity, and absorbing information that was both terrifying and essential. She asked herself, over and over, how they would navigate the months and years to come. What would be required of her? Of William? Of the children? The answers were not yet clear, but one thing was certain: their lives would never be the same. By evening, the initial shock had begun to give way to determination. Kate understood that the days ahead would demand both courage and strategy. She would have to navigate not only the medical realities of William's condition, but also the complex dynamics of family, palace, and public expectation. Every decision would carry weight, every action would matter. And yet, despite the overwhelming pressure, there was a clarity that emerged from the fear. She would not let William face this alone. She would fight for him, stand by him, and protect him in every way she could. But even with this resolve, there was an undeniable tension in the air. Behind the polished walls of Kensington Palace, secrets and fears simmered. Advisors whispered. Friends offered counsel, sometimes conflicting. And the world beyond the gates remained unaware of the private storm that raged inside. Kate knew that one misstep, one slip, could change the trajectory of their lives forever. She also knew that the path forward was filled with uncertainty. And yet, there was no turning back. As the first day of this new reality drew to a close, Kate and William shared a quiet, intimate moment in a room that had witnessed countless family memories over the years. There was fear, yes, but also an unspoken understanding. They were in this together, facing a future that was unknowable, unpredictable, and terrifying. And in that moment, Kate realized that her love, her determination, and her courage would be the anchors holding them through the storm. But just as she allowed herself a moment of fragile hope, a whisper of news from inside the palace hinted at a development she could not have anticipated. One that would complicate everything and force a choice she never imagined she would have to make. It was one of those rare moments when the palace felt almost empty. Staff moved quietly through the corridors, their footsteps muffled by the thick rugs, and the distant sounds of daily life seemed muted behind closed doors. Kate Middleton found herself alone, or at least, alone with the gravity of what had just been revealed. While the public saw a composed duchess performing her royal duties with grace, the reality behind those gilded walls was far more complex, far more human. This was a private world, hidden in plain sight, where emotions could run raw and decisions carried consequences few could imagine. Behind closed doors, Kate faced a paradox. She needed to act decisively for William's health, yet she also had to maintain the careful appearances demanded by palace life. The balance was delicate, almost impossibly so. Every conversation, every whispered instruction, every glance carried weight. Kate had to navigate not only her own fears but the unspoken rules that governed royal life. Protocols that dictated what could be shared, what must remain private, and what would be scrutinized if revealed. She began by gathering the closest members of their inner circle. Aides who had proven their loyalty over years, family friends whose discretion was absolute, and advisors who understood both the medical and public implications of the diagnosis. In a dimly lit study lined with books, Kate laid out the facts as clearly as possible. She spoke with measured calm, but beneath it was a tremor that betrayed the storm inside. This was not just about William's health. It was about managing a situation that could ripple far beyond their family. The room seemed to shrink under the weight of the unspoken. Everyone present understood the stakes. Even in the absence of cameras and headlines, the decisions made in that moment would affect the monarchy, the public perception of the family, and most importantly, William's chances of navigating the uncertain path ahead. Kate listened more than she spoke, absorbing every piece of advice, weighing every opinion, and silently measuring the consequences of each potential course of action. It was during these closed-door discussions that Kate's resolve truly became apparent. Despite the fear gnawing at her, she asked the questions others hesitated to voice. What were the immediate medical priorities? How could they protect William from stress? Which engagements could be postponed without causing suspicion? And perhaps most critically, what could be shared, and with whom? Every answer seemed to carry a contradiction. Transparency versus privacy, protection versus obligation, love versus duty. Kate had to make choices with no perfect path, no guarantee of the outcome. Even as the practical details were discussed, the emotional weight of the situation pressed down relentlessly. Kate's mind returned again and again to William, imagining him alone in his study, grappling with fear that he could never fully admit in public. How does a partner convey reassurance when your own heart is breaking? How do you smile, walk through the halls, and attend public events while knowing that your spouse is facing a medical battle that could change everything? These were questions Kate had no answers for. Only instincts and a steadfast commitment to stand by William, no matter the cost. In these moments, small gestures became monumental. A touch on his arm as he reviewed paperwork, a quiet reminder that he wasn't alone, a simple smile exchanged across a room. It was in these understated actions that Kate expressed her devotion and courage. For William, accustomed to the scrutiny of public life, these private affirmations were grounding. He could feel Kate's strength, even as uncertainty loomed large over his future. And for Kate, offering this support was both an act of love and a source of clarity, a way to anchor herself in a situation that threatened to spiral beyond her control. Yet the privacy of these moments also revealed the tensions and challenges that accompanied such a high-stakes situation. Kate had to manage not only her own emotions but those of the staff and advisors, who were navigating their own anxieties about how this news might impact the palace, the monarchy, and the wider public. Conversations that might have seemed mundane took on extraordinary significance. Every choice of words, every carefully considered recommendation, carried the weight of life-altering consequences. The balance between care and discretion became a daily tightrope, and Kate walked it with determination and quiet grace. Amid these closed-door struggles, Kate also faced the invisible gaze of the world beyond the palace walls. Social media, gossip columns, and the press operated with relentless energy, hungry for any sign of vulnerability, any hint of scandal. Kate understood that if this private struggle were to leak, the consequences could be catastrophic. Not only would William's health become public knowledge, but the scrutiny and judgment of millions could complicate the delicate process of managing his care and their family life. The pressure was suffocating, but Kate refused to let it compromise her priorities. She knew that protecting William meant controlling the narrative, sometimes even from those closest to her. And yet, even as she exerted control, Kate was not immune to moments of doubt and fear. In the quiet hours, away from the eyes of advisors and staff, she wrestled with questions that had no answers. What if the worst happened? What if there were complications she could not anticipate? Could she shoulder the emotional burden if William's condition deteriorated? The enormity of these questions threatened to paralyze her, but Kate found strength in action. By focusing on what could be done, what decisions could be made, what preparations could be arranged, she turned anxiety into purpose, fear into strategy. Behind closed doors, Kate also began to confront another reality. The palace itself was a complex ecosystem of loyalties, ambitions, and subtle pressures. Advisors offered guidance, but not all advice was aligned. Friends had opinions, some protective, some cautious. Kate had to navigate these dynamics carefully, distinguishing between genuine support and agendas that might conflict with her priorities. Every meeting, every conversation demanded discernment. She realized that her strength would not only be tested in her devotion to William, but in her ability to manage the intricate web of influence surrounding them. Amid these calculated decisions, Kate also carved out moments of human connection. She spoke with William privately, offering reassurance and sharing in the unspoken fears that neither could voice fully. Their conversations were punctuated with pauses, glances, and gestures that conveyed more than words could express. It was in these silent exchanges that their bond deepened, where love and partnership became the anchor, holding them steady against a storm of uncertainty. Kate realized that in these private moments, she had to convey hope, even when her own heart trembled. But the palace, for all its grandeur and tradition, could not shelter them indefinitely. News had a way of leaking, rumors could spread, and even trusted allies could falter under pressure. Kate understood that the challenge of maintaining secrecy was as critical as the challenge of managing William's care. Every interaction, every public engagement, and even casual remarks could be scrutinized, analyzed, and distorted. The stakes were higher than ever. And then, late in the evening, a small but troubling message reached Kate from one of the palace aides. It was brief, almost dismissible on the surface, yet it carried a weight that made her pulse quicken. Something was unfolding behind the scenes, an internal decision, a leak, a miscommunication that threatened to complicate everything. Kate read it, reread it, and realized that the sanctuary of closed doors was more fragile than she had imagined. The palace, it seemed, was not only a place of protection but also of potential challenges, secrets, and sudden shifts. As she closed the door behind her and moved toward William, the gravity of the day settled fully upon her. They had navigated the first wave of shock, the first moments of decision-making, and the private acknowledgement of fear. But the day was far from over. Hidden within the palace's corridors, whispers of influence, unspoken tensions, and emerging complications hinted at challenges yet to come. Kate could feel the pull of the unknown, the weight of decisions that would shape not only William's future but their family, their public lives, and the institution they represented. The news itself had been devastating, but what made it even more shocking was what Kate learned later. Not everyone knew the full details. Behind the gilded walls of Kensington Palace, whispers circulated, fragments of information passed cautiously from one aide to another, all with an unspoken understanding. This diagnosis was not just personal. It had the potential to reshape public perception of the monarchy. And for Kate, discovering that parts of William's medical reality had been kept intentionally quiet was a blow she hadn't anticipated. Imagine, for a moment, that someone you love is facing a life-altering condition, and yet, even in the circles closest to you, certain truths are withheld. That was Kate's reality now. She had been briefed on the medical facts, yet gaps remained. Critical details hidden either for caution, discretion, or bureaucratic caution. The sense of isolation that accompanied that knowledge was almost tangible. Kate had always been a woman of composure, a person able to navigate the pressures of public life with poise. But even she felt the chill of betrayal and frustration. If she could not access the full picture, how could she make the right decisions for William? The initial diagnosis had come with medical jargon, tests, and prognoses that were complex and terrifying. Doctors spoke in measured tones about uncertainties, probabilities, and the potential progression of the condition. They discussed interventions, treatments, and lifestyle adjustments that could extend quality of life, but there was no definitive roadmap. Kate listened intently, taking notes, asking questions, and trying to piece together a coherent understanding from the fragments she was given. Every word mattered. Every pause carried significance. Yet, even as she absorbed the information, she sensed that some pieces of the puzzle were deliberately missing. It was a tactic designed to shield her from immediate panic, to ensure that the Duchess did not react too quickly or publicly. Yet the effect was the opposite. The gaps in information sparked anxiety, mistrust, and a pressing need for clarity. Kate knew she had to dig deeper. She began requesting private consultations, cross-referencing medical opinions, and pushing for transparency that others seemed hesitant to provide. It was a delicate balance. She needed the facts, but she also had to respect the boundaries of confidentiality, palace protocol, and William's own comfort. The emotional toll was immense. Kate spent nights awake, pacing the corridors of their private quarters, imagining scenarios that seemed both terrifying and inevitable. She thought of the children, of how to maintain their sense of stability and joy amidst uncertainty. She thought of William, whose natural stoicism hid the internal battles he now faced. And she thought of herself, trying to maintain a facade of strength while the reality of what was hidden from her gnawed at her resolve. This sense of secrecy extended beyond mere medical details. Kate learned that there had been discussions about how much the public should know, what advisors thought the world could handle, and how certain revelations could impact the monarchy's image. It was a revelation that both angered and saddened her. Even in times of personal crisis, the machinery of public perception could override the immediacy of truth. Kate realized she was not only navigating her husband's diagnosis, but also the intricate, often ruthless dynamics of an institution that valued discretion above everything else. Amid the complexity, Kate found herself relying on intuition as much as information. She noticed subtle cues from William's behavior, small changes in his demeanor, and moments of vulnerability that no one else seemed to recognize. He tried to mask fear, frustration, and uncertainty with composure, but Kate knew better. The diagnosis was not just a medical reality. It was an emotional burden, a challenge to their bond, and a test of resilience that would reveal the depths of their partnership. One particularly jarring moment occurred when Kate confronted a senior aide about the gaps in information. The response was careful, almost rehearsed. The details were sensitive, and only certain facts could be shared at this time. The implication was clear. Decisions about disclosure were being made at levels above her, with the public and the monarchy's image in mind. Kate left the meeting with a new sense of determination. If she was to protect William, she needed access to the full truth. And if she could not rely on others, she would have to find it herself. The days that followed were a whirlwind of private research, discreet consultations with trusted medical experts, and relentless observation of William's condition. Kate began to see patterns, subtle signs that others had overlooked, and potential interventions that could make a tangible difference in his quality of life. She also realized that timing was critical. Every delay, every misstep in communication could have consequences. Her role had expanded from supportive spouse to vigilant advocate, a position that demanded both intelligence and emotional endurance. Even as she immersed herself in understanding the diagnosis, Kate had to manage the emotional tides of family life. The children noticed subtle changes, the quiet tension in the air, the uncharacteristic seriousness of their parents, the occasional pause that seemed to carry unspoken worry. Kate worked tirelessly to shield them from fear, using routines, laughter, and distraction to maintain a sense of normalcy. Yet, in private moments, she allowed herself the space to grieve, to fear, and to process the enormity of what they were facing. These moments were fleeting, precious, and necessary, a way to prevent the pressure from overwhelming her entirely. Kate also began to anticipate external pressures. The media, with its insatiable appetite for news, could pose a threat to both William's privacy and the family's stability. She imagined headlines, speculative reports, and intrusive questions that could exacerbate the situation. Even the most innocuous public appearance could become a focal point for conjecture. Her strategy became multi-layered: manage William's care, maintain family stability, and protect their lives from the relentless scrutiny of a public that knew nothing of the hidden reality. And then there were the moments when the diagnosis itself revealed contradictions. Unexpected complications, ambiguous prognosis, and conflicting advice from experts. Kate found herself in the eye of a storm, where every choice carried weight, every recommendation had potential risks, and even the most confident guidance could shift with new information. She began to understand that the diagnosis was not static. It was fluid, unpredictable, and deeply personal. And in this uncertainty, she had to find the balance between hope and realism, action and patience. One evening, as Kate sat alone reviewing the latest medical notes, she realized the full scope of what had been withheld. It wasn't malicious. It was cautious, protective, perhaps even necessary from some perspectives. But it also underscored a harsh truth. If she was to safeguard William, she could not rely solely on the information provided to her. She would need to act, decide, and advocate with a clarity and courage that few outside their private world could comprehend. But just as she began to map out the next steps, a subtle notification reached her phone, a brief message from someone she trusted implicitly, warning of an upcoming meeting where further revelations about William's health would be disclosed, in a manner that could complicate her plans. It was a reminder that the palace, for all its history and grandeur, was not a neutral environment. Information had a way of being controlled, twisted, or revealed at unexpected moments. And for Kate, this meant that the path forward was fraught with unseen obstacles, hidden agendas, and the constant tension between truth and discretion. The day had begun with a diagnosis, but it ended with a haunting realization. The truth, in its entirety, was not fully hers yet. And even as she prepared to confront the next layer of uncertainty, Kate knew that the hidden facts, the undisclosed details, and the carefully guarded knowledge could dramatically shift the course of what lay ahead. The weight of the diagnosis did not simply settle over Kate Middleton. It pressed, suffocated, and demanded attention in every waking moment. As she walked the quiet corridors of Kensington Palace, every echo of her footsteps reminded her of the gravity of the situation. Behind closed doors, she carried the knowledge that William's life had suddenly become fragile, that the man she had shared decades with, the father of her children, her partner, her confidant, was facing an uncertain future. And in that awareness, Kate found herself confronting a battle she could not share, could not delegate, and could not escape. The emotional struggle of watching someone you love face mortality while you feel powerless to protect them completely. From the outside, Kate has always been the picture of grace. Public appearances, royal engagements, and countless charitable events have painted her as composed, poised, and capable. Yet behind the carefully maintained exterior, her inner world was turbulent. Anxiety, fear, and doubt churned like a stormy sea, and she had no shore to cling to. Each day brought new challenges. Medical updates that oscillated between hope and concern, subtle changes in William's health that could go unnoticed by anyone else but her, and the endless responsibilities of family and palace life pressing from every angle. Kate's emotional battle began with denial. It was instinctive, primal, and perhaps necessary. Could this really be happening? Could William, vibrant and strong, truly be facing a condition with uncertain prognosis? She found herself replaying moments from their life together, clinging to memories that reminded her of the man who seemed invincible. Laughter shared on quiet mornings, private jokes whispered during long journeys, the protective embrace after a long day. These memories became both a comfort and a source of anguish, as they reminded her of what might be lost. The next stage, after denial, was fear, a fear that was visceral, immediate, and overwhelming. Kate's mind raced through worst-case scenarios, the progression of the illness, complications that might arise, and the potential impact on her children. She imagined the unimaginable. Birthdays and milestones without William, the family fractured by grief, and a future where she would have to navigate life without the anchor of her partner. In these moments, she found herself clinging to small rituals: early morning tea, quiet walks in the garden, and private conversations with aides. Anything that could ground her in reality, even fleetingly. Yet fear alone could not sustain her. Kate's next challenge was maintaining composure for William's sake. He, too, was confronting the uncertainty, but he depended on her strength as much as she relied on his. Their bond, forged through years of shared experience and public scrutiny, became both a lifeline and a burden. Kate had to project calm, reassurance, and confidence, even when her own heart trembled. Every smile, every gentle touch, every moment of affection was measured, deliberate, and purposeful. She became an anchor not just for him, but for the entire household, setting a tone of stability in the face of an invisible storm. Isolation became an unexpected companion. While advisors, aides, and medical professionals offered guidance, Kate realized that few could truly comprehend the depth of what she was experiencing. Friends, family, and the palace staff could provide support, but the intimate fear she carried, the knowledge of the diagnosis, the constant weighing of possible outcomes, the burden of responsibility, was hers alone. Nights became the hardest, when silence magnified every fear and doubt. She would lie awake, listening to the quiet of the palace, imagining scenarios that seemed both impossible and terrifying. Amid this emotional turmoil, Kate found herself oscillating between hope and despair. Hope emerged in small victories. A positive medical update, a moment of levity shared with William, or a day when he seemed stronger than the last. Despair followed closely, triggered by any minor setback or ambiguous test result. The emotional swings were exhausting, relentless, and sometimes felt impossible to endure. But Kate understood that the emotional state she projected had real consequences. William's strength, their family's stability, and the ability to navigate this crisis depended on her managing her own fear, even when it burned beneath the surface. To cope, Kate turned to routines and rituals that had always provided stability. Early morning walks through the palace gardens became meditative. She would focus on the feel of grass beneath her feet, the sound of birds in the trees, and the rhythmic cadence of her own breath. She journaled late at night, writing down fears, observations, and reflections, creating a record of her emotional journey. These practices did not eliminate fear, but they offered a semblance of control in a situation defined by uncertainty. The emotional battle was compounded by a sense of responsibility. Kate was not only a wife, but also a mother and a public figure. She had to ensure that the children felt safe, that they experienced normalcy, and that their lives remained as unaffected as possible. She could not show fear or despair around them, yet she could not ignore the weight of her own emotions. Every interaction, every gesture, had to be carefully calibrated. The emotional labor was immense, yet Kate carried it with quiet, almost imperceptible grace. Another layer of complexity came from the palace itself. Advisors and aides operated under their own pressures, and Kate had to navigate their concerns, opinions, and occasional disagreements. Every conversation required tact and strategic thinking, as she balanced the need for honesty with discretion and care with authority. She had to make choices that would affect not just William, but the institution they represented. The interplay between personal fear and institutional duty created an emotional tension that was constant and exhausting. Kate's inner dialogue became a daily battlefield. Questions raced through her mind. Was she doing enough? Could she anticipate complications? Was there a choice she was overlooking that might make a difference? Each thought spiraled into another, creating a labyrinth of fear and responsibility that she had to navigate with deliberate focus. In private, she allowed herself moments of vulnerability, tears shed in the quiet of her bedroom, whispered prayers, and silent reflection. But these moments were fleeting. She had to rise again, present herself with composure, and continue her role as anchor and advocate for William. Even amid these pressures, Kate's love for William remained a guiding force. Every decision, every action, and every emotional adjustment was motivated by the desire to protect him, support him, and ensure his quality of life. She drew strength from their shared history, the trials they had overcome, the laughter and intimacy they had shared, and the commitment they had made to each other. This love became both a shield and a compass, helping her navigate a landscape that was unpredictable, high stakes, and emotionally taxing. But the palace, for all its grandeur, could not provide complete sanctuary. Every day brought new challenges, an unexpected meeting with advisors, a confidential medical update, or a subtle reminder of how closely their lives were monitored. Kate realized that the emotional battle was intertwined with practical decisions, and that vigilance could never waver. Every choice, no matter how small, had consequences for William's health, the family's well-being, and the public perception of their strength. Behind the polished walls of Kensington Palace, secrets have a way of lingering, unspoken yet ever-present, influencing decisions, shifting loyalties, and quietly shaping destinies. For Kate Middleton, the realization that there were secrets surrounding William's diagnosis and the potential consequences of their revelation was almost unbearable. These were not idle rumors. They were carefully guarded pieces of information, withheld for reasons ranging from caution to control. And Kate knew that if these secrets came to light, the impact on her family could be devastating. It began with whispers she overheard, seemingly innocuous but laden with meaning. Staff members, aware of the gravity of the situation, spoke in hushed tones, referencing meetings Kate had not attended, documents she had not seen, and decisions that had been made without her input. At first, she brushed it off, attributing the gaps to standard palace protocol. But as the pieces fell into place, a troubling pattern emerged. She was not being told everything, and some of what was withheld could directly affect William's health and their family's stability. The tension this created was suffocating. Kate had spent months navigating the emotional roller coaster of William's diagnosis, balancing fear, hope, and determination. Now, the added layer of secrecy threatened to destabilize her carefully maintained equilibrium. How could she advocate for William if she did not have access to all the facts? How could she make informed decisions when critical pieces of information were intentionally hidden? These questions haunted her, gnawing at her resolve. As she dug deeper, Kate discovered that some secrets were related to the diagnosis itself, treatments, test results, and medical opinions that had been withheld in an attempt to protect her from panic. Other secrets, however, were tied to the palace's internal dynamics, decisions about what could be made public, strategic timing for announcements, and considerations about how the monarchy would manage perception. The lines between protection, manipulation, and control blurred, leaving Kate in a state of constant vigilance and strategic calculation. One particularly unsettling discovery involved a medical consultation that had been scheduled without her knowledge. Kate learned of it through a passing comment from an aide, a remark meant to be casual but loaded with implications. The consultation, she realized, could significantly influence William's treatment options, yet she had been deliberately excluded. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Even in the most intimate and private aspects of her family's life, decisions were being made over her head. The emotional impact of this secrecy was profound. Kate felt a mixture of frustration, anger, and betrayal, not toward William, who was equally constrained by palace protocol, but toward the system itself. She had always understood that the monarchy operated under unique pressures and rules, but the personal cost of these rules was now painfully clear. The very institution she had dedicated herself to, the world she had embraced with grace and commitment, now posed obstacles to protecting the person she loved most. Despite the fear and anger, Kate channeled her energy into vigilance. She began meticulously tracking every meeting, consultation, and piece of correspondence related to William's condition. She asked questions, cross-referenced information, and discreetly sought additional opinions from trusted medical experts. Every step was calculated, every action purposeful. Kate knew that the stakes could not be higher. The secrets she uncovered could determine not only William's medical outcome, but the stability and cohesion of their family. At the same time, Kate had to manage the emotional fallout of these revelations. The knowledge that important information had been withheld intensified her protective instincts, not just for William, but for their children. She worried about the impact of palace secrecy on their sense of safety and trust. How much could a child understand about uncertainty and fear? How could she shield them from a reality that was constantly shifting, while also preparing them for the possibility that their father's life might be at risk? Kate found herself navigating a delicate balance, trying to maintain stability while confronting her own emotional storm. The secrecy also magnified the pressures of public life. Every engagement, appearance, and gesture was scrutinized by advisors and the public alike. Kate realized that any misstep could be interpreted as weakness or panic, potentially fueling speculation and gossip. The tension between protecting her family and fulfilling her public duties became almost unbearable. She had to be both a mother and a guardian, a strategist and a confidant, all while maintaining the composure expected of a duchess. In the midst of this struggle, Kate discovered that some secrets were more personal than she had imagined. Certain advisors had expressed opinions about how she should behave in response to William's condition, suggesting restraint in displays of emotion, careful curation of her public persona, and even subtle manipulations of information to shape perception. The idea that her emotions could be managed, controlled, or even weaponized was both insulting and terrifying. Kate understood that to protect her family, she had to assert herself, claim authority, and refuse to be sidelined. The tension reached a boiling point one evening when Kate received an unexpected message, a confidential update about William's condition that contradicted previous information she had been given. The discrepancy was alarming, hinting at decisions made without her knowledge and potential risks that had been minimized or ignored. Kate's pulse quickened as she realized the gravity of the situation. The secrets being kept were not trivial. They had real, tangible consequences for William's health and the well-being of their family. Faced with this revelation, Kate's determination hardened. She would no longer accept partial truths or withheld information. She began demanding transparency, questioning decisions, and asserting her role as William's advocate. Every conversation with palace advisors became strategic, every interaction purposeful. Kate knew that the stakes were not only personal, but institutional. The decisions she influenced could affect not just her husband, but the monarchy and the legacy they represented. Yet even as she asserted control, Kate grappled with the emotional burden of knowing how fragile their position truly was. The secrets surrounding William's condition were not merely administrative. They were potential fractures in the foundation of their family. If mishandled, they could lead to misunderstanding, mistrust, and conflict. Kate understood that navigating these secrets required intelligence, courage, and emotional resilience unlike anything she had faced before. And just as she began to feel a measure of control, an urgent message arrived from a trusted aide, a revelation about a decision made in secret that could fundamentally alter William's treatment and the family's ability to respond effectively. The corridors of Kensington Palace had always seemed imposing, but today they felt suffocating. Kate Middleton walked with a sense of urgency she had never experienced before, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear, frustration, and determination. The secrecy, the withheld information, the hidden decisions. It was time to confront the palace hierarchy directly. The confrontation she was about to face was not just about William's diagnosis. It was about asserting her voice, demanding transparency, and protecting the family she loved with every fiber of her being. As she approached the meeting room, the weight of history and protocol pressed down on her. Every step echoed against the polished floors, reminding her of the centuries of tradition, of expectations placed on women in the royal family, and of the delicate balance between private loyalty and public duty. Kate knew that challenging the palace was not a trivial matter. It carried risks, professional, personal, and emotional, but she could not remain silent. Not when William's health and the family's stability were at stake. The meeting began with polite introductions and measured pleasantries, a facade of civility that masked the tension simmering beneath. Advisors, aides, and senior palace officials were present, each carefully observing Kate, each ready to defend decisions made without her input. Kate remained calm, her posture composed, but inside, her mind raced. She had prepared meticulously, knowing that any misstep could weaken her position. Every word, every question, every request for clarification had been rehearsed in her mind, but nothing could fully prepare her for the charged atmosphere that awaited her. Kate began by addressing the elephant in the room, the lack of transparency regarding William's diagnosis and treatment options. Her voice, steady and controlled, conveyed both authority and urgency. She detailed what she knew, what she had discovered, and the discrepancies she had identified. Every statement was precise, backed by evidence, and framed in a way that left little room for denial or deflection. The palace officials listened, some nodding politely, others shifting uncomfortably as Kate's words cut through layers of protocol and guarded discretion. The tension in the room escalated as Kate pressed further, challenging decisions that had been made without her knowledge. She questioned the rationale behind withholding information, highlighting the potential risks to William's health and the family's well-being. Advisors offered carefully worded responses, emphasizing caution, confidentiality, and the importance of maintaining public perception. Kate, however, was unyielding. She made it clear that while she understood the need for discretion, the protection of William and their children could not be compromised by bureaucracy or image management. At one point, the discussion became heated. An advisor, speaking with a tone of authority, suggested that certain decisions were standard protocol and implied that Kate's involvement could complicate matters. Kate's response was measured but firm. Her priority was William's health and the stability of their family, not protocol. She reminded the room that while tradition held value, it could not supersede the immediate needs of those directly affected. The room fell silent, the weight of her words lingering in the air. Kate's confrontation was not merely verbal, it was strategic. She presented alternative approaches, suggested new consultations with medical experts, and proposed a plan for controlled communication with the public, ensuring that information could be shared responsibly without compromising William's privacy. Every proposal was designed to demonstrate her commitment, intelligence, and capability, leaving no doubt that she was not acting impulsively, but with careful consideration and foresight. Even as she asserted control, Kate had to navigate subtle palace politics. Allies and adversaries alike were present, some offering support quietly, others maintaining distance, their motives unclear. Kate recognized the need to read the room, to gauge reactions, and to adjust her approach dynamically. Every smile, nod, or hesitation carried meaning. She understood that the confrontation was not just about the facts at hand, but about positioning herself as a decisive, trusted advocate in a system where her influence had traditionally been limited by protocol and gendered expectations. The emotional stakes were immense. Kate felt the weight of her family's future pressing down on her shoulders. Each decision, each challenge to the status quo, carried consequences that could ripple far beyond the immediate moment. She thought of William, alone in his study, trusting her to navigate this complex and often treacherous environment. She thought of the children, relying on her to shield them from fear and uncertainty. And she thought of herself, confronting fears she had long hidden, drawing strength from a love that refused to be subdued by circumstance or tradition. As the meeting progressed, cracks in the palace's carefully maintained facade began to appear. Advisors who had initially defended secrecy now hesitated, reconsidering positions in the face of Kate's clarity, persistence, and unwavering commitment. Others sought to regain control by emphasizing procedure and tradition, but Kate remained unflinching, balancing firmness with diplomacy. She understood that victory in this confrontation would not come from aggression alone, but from demonstrating that her priorities aligned with the well-being of the family and the integrity of the monarchy. Yet, even as she asserted influence, Kate knew that the confrontation was only the beginning. The decisions made in that room would set the stage for future challenges, including potential public scrutiny, media speculation, and the ongoing management of William's health. The battle for transparency and control was far from over, and she could not afford complacency. Every choice, every interaction, and every statement would continue to carry weight, shaping the course of their private and public lives. By the end of the meeting, Kate had achieved a measure of progress, but it was tenuous. Advisors had agreed to provide additional information, reconsider certain decisions, and involve her more directly in future consultations. Yet the underlying tension remained, a reminder that palace politics were intricate, unpredictable, and often resistant to change. Kate understood that she had won a critical battle, but the war for her family's security, William's health, and control over their narrative was far from complete. As she left the room, Kate felt a mix of relief, exhaustion, and renewed determination. She had confronted the palace, asserted her voice, and claimed authority where it had been previously limited. But the challenges ahead were clear. Secrets could still emerge, medical developments could complicate matters, and the delicate balance between privacy, duty, and family well-being remained fragile. It started as a normal morning in Kensington Palace, or at least as normal as any morning could be under the shadow of William's diagnosis. Kate Middleton had risen early, preparing breakfast for the children, reviewing the latest updates from the palace aides, and reviewing William's medical notes. The calm of routine, however, was deceptive. Moments later, a message arrived that would shatter the fragile sense of control Kate had painstakingly built. William's condition had taken an unexpected turn, one that required immediate attention and posed a potential risk to his health. The news struck her like a physical blow. Her heart raced, her hands trembled slightly as she read the details, and for a moment, the world narrowed to a singular focus: William's well-being. She knew the stakes were higher than ever. This was not a minor fluctuation in test results or a routine complication. It was an acute event that demanded urgent action. The uncertainty of the diagnosis had become real, immediate, and terrifying. Kate moved swiftly, her mind racing through the steps that needed to be taken. She alerted the medical team, coordinated with William's personal aides, and ensured that privacy protocols were in place to prevent leaks. Every action was precise, deliberate, and urgent. There was no room for hesitation. She had spent months preparing for scenarios like this in theory, but now she faced the raw reality, and the emotional weight was almost unbearable. Arriving at William's side, Kate was struck by the stark contrast between his outward composure and the seriousness of the situation. He tried to maintain his characteristic calm, speaking in measured tones and reassuring her with a faint smile, but she could see through it, the subtle tension in his posture, the slight pallor of his face, the brief moments when he seemed to waver. Kate's instincts told her that the crisis was not just medical. It was emotional, psychological, and deeply personal. She had to remain the anchor, even as her own heart raced with fear. The palace staff, alerted by Kate, moved quickly and efficiently. Nurses and aides coordinated, ensuring that William had everything he needed while maintaining discretion. The room, usually a space of quiet routine, now felt charged, every movement purposeful, every word weighed. Kate absorbed every detail, and made decisions on the fly, balancing her role as wife, advocate, and protector with the need to manage the logistics of an urgent medical situation. Amid the flurry of activity, Kate's thoughts kept returning to the children. How could she shield them from fear without underestimating the seriousness of the situation? How could she maintain stability while grappling with her own emotional turmoil? She knew she had to compartmentalize, act decisively in the present, protect the family, and process her fear in moments of solitude. The emotional labor was exhausting, but Kate understood that her strength was now more critical than ever. The medical team, briefed and professional, worked to assess the situation. Kate watched carefully, listening to every word, every recommendation, and every interpretation of test results. The uncertainty was palpable, nothing was definitive, and every possibility carried weight. As she absorbed the information, she realized that this crisis could redefine not only William's immediate treatment, but also long-term planning for his health. Every decision made in the next few hours could have lasting consequences. During this tense period, Kate's emotions oscillated between fear and determination. She recalled moments from their life together, the laughter shared during family trips, the quiet evenings spent reading with the children, the support and partnership they had given each other over the years. These memories became both comfort and fuel, reminding her of what was at stake and why she could not falter. Her love for William was not abstract. It was a guiding force, shaping every decision, every word, and every gesture. As the hours passed, Kate faced not only the medical crisis, but also the pressure of coordination with the palace hierarchy. Advisors, aides, and officials were monitoring developments closely, balancing the need for discretion with the reality that a significant event was unfolding. Kate had to navigate their involvement carefully, ensuring that decisions were made in William's best interest while maintaining authority over the management of information. Every interaction required tact, clarity, and resolve. Amid this orchestrated chaos, Kate noticed subtle signs of William's own emotional struggle. The man who had faced countless public challenges with stoicism now relied on her in ways rarely seen. A fleeting glance, a slight squeeze of her hand, a whispered reassurance. These moments conveyed more than words could. Kate understood that her role extended beyond logistical management. She was the emotional anchor, the source of calm and confidence, and the person who could sustain him through fear and uncertainty. But the crisis was far from over. As the medical team worked, they uncovered details that complicated the situation further. A previously undetected complication, revealed in a test conducted earlier, now demanded immediate attention. The potential implications were serious. Decisions about interventions, hospital stays, and even temporary adjustments to royal duties became urgent priorities. Kate realized that this was a turning point, not just for William's immediate care, but for the family's future, their public life, and the narrative surrounding his diagnosis. Kate's instincts told her that every moment counted. She coordinated with specialists, consulted privately with trusted medical advisors, and made decisions with remarkable composure despite the inner turmoil. Her ability to remain calm and strategic under pressure was extraordinary, yet the emotional toll was undeniable. Each choice carried the weight of potential outcomes, each action influenced by a combination of medical fact, intuition, and love. Late into the day, after hours of uncertainty and rapid decision-making, a temporary stabilization of William's condition offered a brief reprieve. Kate allowed herself a moment to breathe, to acknowledge the intensity of what had transpired, and to prepare for the ongoing vigilance that would be required. She understood that this was not an endpoint, but a new phase of management, one that demanded constant attention, emotional fortitude, and strategic planning. The moment had arrived. The truth about William's condition, long shrouded in careful discretion and whispered secrecy, could no longer be delayed. Kate Middleton knew that the family needed clarity, not only for practical decision-making, but to face the emotional reality that had been creeping through their lives like a shadow. The confrontation with truth would be painful, unavoidable, and transformative, and Kate had to prepare herself and her children for the impact. It began with a quiet conversation in their private quarters. Kate called William to her side, her voice steady but tinged with gravity. He had remained composed through so much already, but even his stoicism could not shield him entirely from the anxiety that brewed beneath the surface. Kate had gathered all the information she could, medical updates, expert opinions, and a chronology of decisions that had been made behind the scenes. What she revealed to William was both meticulous and compassionate, delivered with the precision of someone who understood the balance between truth and emotional support. The initial reaction was subtle. William's usual calm faltered for a brief moment, a flicker of vulnerability passing across his face. He asked questions, probing for details Kate had prepared, and together they discussed the implications, weighing options, and potential outcomes. For Kate, this was a delicate dance. She needed to be honest without inducing panic, realistic without extinguishing hope. Every word mattered, every pause carried weight. And yet, beneath the careful conversation, both of them understood the gravity of what lay ahead. Once William was fully informed, Kate turned her attention to their children. She faced a challenge that few outside the royal family could imagine: how to communicate a life-altering reality in a way that preserved stability and trust, without overwhelming them with fear. The children sensed tension, subtle cues in Kate's tone, posture, and expressions that hinted at something serious. Kate had to navigate these cues with care, transforming anxiety into reassurance, curiosity into understanding, and uncertainty into resilience. She began with honesty, framed by love and reassurance. The conversation was slow, deliberate, and attuned to the children's emotional capacity. Kate explained that their father was facing a health challenge that would require care and attention, that some details were complex, but that together they could support him. She emphasized that their family's bond, love, and strength would remain steadfast, even in the face of uncertainty. The children asked questions, some hesitant, some direct, and Kate answered each with patience, empathy, and clarity. As the family discussed the situation, the emotional weight of truth became undeniable. Tears were shed, hugs were exchanged, and moments of silence stretched longer than words could fill. Kate felt the full force of responsibility pressing down on her. She had to protect not only William's health, but the emotional well-being of their children. Every reaction, every emotional spike, had consequences. Kate's composure was tested repeatedly, yet she managed to maintain a guiding presence, offering calm, reassurance, and love even amid the rising tide of fear. The family's confrontation with truth also brought unexpected moments of strength and resilience. William, though deeply affected, demonstrated remarkable fortitude. He reassured the children, leaned on Kate for support, and engaged in problem-solving discussions.